The introduction of 50-year mortgages, 15-year automotive loans, and localized rent surges of 30% within a single annual cycle are not signs of a standard inflationary cycle. They are the clear signatures of a system that has already failed its population. Across the United States, a quiet, terrifying structural rotation is taking place, completely hidden beneath a surface layer of rising stock indices, high-profile technology valuations, and elite consumer luxury. While mainstream financial media anchors point continuously to abstract macroeconomic data to claim a resilient economic system, the physical reality of the nation is hollowing out from the inside out. Ordinary families are cramming multiple generations into improvised suburban sheds. Highly credentialed professionals earning six-figure salaries are moving back into their childhood bedrooms out of sheer math, and basic weekly grocery bills are clearing $500 for small households just to sustain basic nutritional survival. This is not temporary market friction. It is the onset of a profound terminal transformation of the middle-class way of life. The financial elite look at the surface metrics and declare that the environment is stable, completely blind to the reality that the foundational systems of shelter, labor, health preservation, and credit have fundamentally decoupled from the actual income distribution of the population. In a traditional market contraction, the symptoms of economic weakness are universally transparent. Equity markets tumble, corporate entities execute mass layoffs, and politicians are forced to publicly admit that the apparatus requires intervention. But this modern moment is far more dangerous precisely because the pain is asymmetrically divided. The top layer of the economy moves parabolic on the back of asset inflation and automated software dividends, while the lower leg of society turns straight down into a state of absolute structural despair. We are currently living through a collective underreaction phase, where the broader public treats these extreme distortions as isolated personal struggles, unaware that the core infrastructure of the real economy is reaching a final, math-driven breaking point. The most undeniable signal that the domestic architecture is breaking apart is the total disintegration of basic housing mechanics. When the cost of basic shelter becomes completely incompatible with the income distribution of a nation, every other economic pillar begins to collapse. The emergence of the 50-year mortgage option is not a financial innovation. It is an open admission that conventional middle-class salaries can no longer support current real estate valuations under any rational lending model. Stretching a consumer debt obligation across half a century converts homeownership from a wealth-building asset into a lifelong, multi-generational corporate lease. Across major metropolitan nodes, the scale of this extraction is entirely quantifiable. Monthly rent increases of $400 to $800 have been transformed from exceptional spikes into the standard baseline requirement for basic apartments. Simultaneously, municipal property taxes that once advanced at a predictable pace are jumping by 30% to 70% within a single reassessment cycle. Homeowners in regions like Cook County are observing their property tax invoices violently climb from $6,000 to $13,000 instantly, completely destabilizing household budgets that were already deeply strained by soaring utility tariffs and private home insurance premiums. In high-velocity coastal zones, the price of entry into a basic, unrenovated living space has drifted into a realm of pure mathematical fantasy. In Santa Monica, standard studio apartments demand nearly $5,000 a month. One-bedroom units clear $6,300, and standard three-bedroom configurations approach an astonishing $12,000 before secondary municipal fees are calculated. This structural eviction is forcing a massive pattern of hidden overcrowding across the country. Structures originally engineered to shelter a single nuclear family are now housing 3 or 4 separate family groups, with 6 to 8 individual vehicles grouping along suburban driveways because multi-tenant survival has entirely replaced independent middle-class residency. The lowest end of the real estate market has completely fractured, leaving full-time, working-class professionals to seek refuge inside converted backyard garages, tool-shed efficiencies, and uninsulated micro-units. This dynamic has engineered a state of total systemic immobility, Workers can no longer migrate toward higher wage jobs because they cannot absorb the market rents in the new region. Homeowners cannot downsize because remote work migration has artificially inflated historically affordable territories, and existing owners are pushed into negative cash flow by escalating localized taxes and insurance costs. The housing framework is no longer merely expensive. It has become a mechanism of permanent financial containment. This housing breakdown is only possible because the real-world financial foundation underneath the workforce has experienced a catastrophic, silent rupture. The core crisis of the modern landscape is the systemic divergence between what individuals earn and what basic, non-discretionary survival now costs. Since 2020, the price of absolute essentials has advanced at multiples that completely dwarf any nominal wage adjustments. Essential food categories that historically moved upward by a predictable 2% to 3% annually have experienced a cumulative explosion of 20% to 40%. Commuting expenses, home energy utilities, and essential commercial services have followed an identical upward path, ensuring that full-time employment no longer functions as a guarantee of financial stability. Even high-earning professionals within the $80,000 to $120,000 salary brackets, the historical core of the upper middle class, are discovering that their entire take-home pay is instantly consumed by non-negotiable recurring obligations before a single dollar can be allocated toward personal savings or future capital investments. A $150 monthly jump in healthcare insurance deductions or a $100 rise in baseline heating costs cannot be rationalized or avoided. These charges stack relentlessly, continuously compressing consumer elasticity. Concurrently, corporate employers facing rapid automated disruption, margin compression, and slowed revenue growth are aggressively suppressing wage expansion. Entire white-collar sectors, including marketing, graphic design, administrative support, and customer service, have watched their baseline compensation stagnate or actively contract as executive suites systematically swap human labor for artificial intelligence software tools. The result is a highly educated workforce that is technically employed on a full-time schedule, yet financially deteriorating year over year. This new form of structural poverty is uniquely destructive because it hides directly behind corporate titles, college degrees, and professional routines, leaving workers with less than $500 of liquid capital at the end of each billing cycle. If this clinical breakdown of the domestic cost of living illusion has exposed the real-world dangers facing your personal portfolio, you must immediately acknowledge that traditional wealth preservation advice is fundamentally obsolete. Relying on conventional cash positions or passive paper indices inside a system experiencing institutional inversion is a prescription for quiet liquidation. To safeguard your family's future, you must learn to analyze the economy through the prism of physical asset utility, rather than nominal numbers on a screen. There are specific structural toolkits and geographic allocation frameworks engineered to insulate private capital from tax shocks, healthcare extractions, and automated labor displacement. Navigating this transition requires moving into reality before the broader public realizes the system has structurally decoupled from the income of the population. The severe wage cost divergence becomes even more devastating when you calculate the predatory, relentless drain of the modern domestic healthcare infrastructure. Medical expenses have evolved from a standard secondary safety insurance line item into an aggressive wealth extraction mechanism, draining household liquidity faster than any standard rent increase or utility spike. Individual insurance premiums that once required a modest deduction from a paycheck are now demanding between $350 and $750 per month, directly subtracted by corporate human resource departments before a worker ever sees their nominal compensation. Concurrently, standard annual deductibles routinely exceed $4,000 to $8,000, creating an environment where the overwhelming majority of insured Americans must pay entirely out of pocket for their daily medical needs before their policy offers a single dollar of real-world relief. This systemic extraction is not confined to major catastrophic health events. It actively punishes individuals trying to manage basic, highly predictable human medical care. The cost of routine prescriptions, specialized clinical consultations, and baseline diagnostic imaging has advanced at speeds that completely outrun nominal wage growth. A single visit to a standard urgent care clinic easily crosses the $250 threshold before any diagnostic laboratory testing is introduced. Premium increases of 40% to 70% over a handful of corporate renewal cycles have become the standard experience across major employers, forcing millions of individuals to completely cancel or downgrade their health coverage, leaving them exposed to total financial ruin. The modern system effectively transforms health insurance from a protective shield into an ongoing, high-cost financial liability. Workers surrender hundreds of dollars per paycheck to maintain access to restrictive networks that provide substantially less coverage than plans executed a decade ago. These healthcare-related payroll deductions consume the exact liquid income that families historically deployed to cover baseline housing, food, or retirement savings. This structural burden has triggered an unprecedented national reliance on medical forbearance, deferred physical treatment, and escalating personal balance sheets. Even fully insured individuals are steadily accumulating unpaid medical balances that compound monthly. For millions of households, the daily interest accumulating on past due healthcare bills now outpaces their traditional credit card minimum payments, transforming medical debt into one of the most volatile and fastest growing bankruptcy triggers in the nation. This healthcare drain feeds directly into the next destabilizing force: the accelerated price explosion of everyday living costs. The basic infrastructural anchors of a normal lifestyle, including grocery inputs, household electricity, internet connectivity, and basic transport logistics, are eroding family balances at a velocity that no traditional salary matrix can keep pace with. This is not the mild, calculated consumer price index inflation reported by official state bureaus. It is an accelerated cost explosion, concentrated specifically on items that human beings cannot choose to avoid. Food inflation serves as the most visceral example of this collapse. A standard weekly grocery run that averaged $180 to $220 a few years ago now routinely blows past the $400 to $600 threshold, even for small, conservative households. Core staples such as eggs, poultry, basic dairy, fresh produce, and packaged goods have experienced a cumulative rise of 20% to 60%, rendering higher quality or organic food items completely inaccessible to millions of families. Concurrently, baseline home utilities have been transformed into variable taxes that citizens cannot opt out of. Monthly electricity bills have climbed toward $220 to $300, driven upward by corporate grid maintenance fees, escalating wholesale fuel costs, and extreme weather strain. Basic internet and mobile connectivity, essential tools for modern employment, routinely command $100 to $150 per line after the application of hidden municipal surcharges, equipment rental fees, and administrative compliance penalties. Transportation has similarly been converted into an intense financial pressure point. Auto insurance premiums across multiple states have surged by 20% to 40% within a single semi-annual renewal window, while the price of routine mechanical maintenance, replacement tires, and baseline vehicle diagnostics carries a price tag that bears zero relation to pre-2020 norms. Even basic leisure activities, historically the vital psychological relief valve for a highly stressed workforce, have been converted into exclusive luxury products. A simple trip to a local cinema can easily hit $80 to $90 for 3 adults before any concessions are purchased. Personal care services, gym memberships, local barbers, and basic household repairs have advanced by double-digit percentages, pushing everyday quality of life items completely into luxury territory. This universal price explosion eliminates financial elasticity, ensuring that every dollar is completely allocated before it hits a bank account, leaving the population uniquely vulnerable to minor supply shocks. This consumer cost explosion becomes uniquely dangerous when it converges with a deep structural crisis unfolding inside the domestic labor market. The United States is currently confronting a rare, highly volatile dual employment crisis. Millions of white-collar career tracks are permanently disappearing due to algorithmic software automation occurring at the exact historical moment that the nation lacks the essential skilled physical labor required to maintain the baseline physical economy. This extreme structural imbalance, characterized by a massive oversupply of displaced office workers and a severe undersupply of manual tradespeople, marks a fundamental malfunction in the educational and employment ecosystem. The acceleration of artificial intelligence serves as the primary catalyst for the white-collar contraction. Entire functional categories of corporate employment, including marketing strategy, graphic design, administrative support, customer service routing, and copywriting, are being rapidly absorbed by algorithmic systems capable of generating comparable outputs at near zero marginal cost. The immediate financial incentive for corporate executives is completely unyielding. A company can effortlessly swap a $65,000 human employee carrying healthcare liabilities for a $49 monthly software subscription. Consequently, corporate layoffs and permanent hiring freezes are specifically concentrated on professional office tracks that were historically marketed as secure, upper-middle-class careers. Yet, while these digital office roles evaporate into software code, the physical infrastructure of the country faces an acute shortage of licensed electricians, plumbers, industrial welders, HVAC technicians, and construction laborers. In multiple states, open trade vacancies outpace active applicants by ratios exceeding 3-to-1. The average age of the remaining domestic trade workforce is rapidly approaching 50, and retirements are accelerating. The maintenance of basic power grids, municipal water lines, mass transportation networks, and residential housing construction depends entirely on a manual labor force that simply does not exist in sufficient numbers. This creates an inverted economy where traditional university degrees are devalued, certifications are overpriced, and wages are fundamentally misaligned with national survival needs. Despite this clear signal, structural barriers to entry, a total lack of localized training infrastructure, and high tool costs prevent a rapid transition of displaced office workers into these essential trades. The labor market is no longer simply inefficient, it is operating in reverse, actively capping wage growth while slowing down the construction of the very housing and infrastructure required to lower the cost of living. As baseline wages completely fail to intersect with the cost of daily survival, the domestic population has been forced to execute a rapid shift from income-driven consumption directly to credit-driven survival. Households are increasingly dependent on sophisticated financial products that delay payment rather than improve real affordability, initiating a systemic debt spiral that mirrors the unstable financial engineering that immediately preceded the Great Depression. The explosive proliferation of buy now, pay later platforms serves as the clearest signal of this systemic decay. Originally marketed to the public as a digital convenience tool for luxury transactions, these platforms have evolved into a shadow replacement for disposable consumer income. Transactions under $40, including basic weekly groceries, children's clothing, routine household cleaning agents, and essential utilities, are now systematically split into 4 separate installment payments across millions of accounts. For a massive segment of the population, these applications function as a shadow credit system that masks the psychological friction of traditional borrowing. However, the effective interest equivalent can easily cross the 30% APR threshold once hidden platform fees, processing surcharges, and late payment penalties begin to accumulate. Concurrently, national revolving credit card debt has breached an unprecedented $1.3 trillion, with baseline interest rates climbing past 20% to 25%, even for consumers possessing stable credit histories. The most dangerous element of this credit-dependent lifestyle is the emergence of interest-first repayment frameworks across both federal student loans and private consumer obligations. When daily interest accrual reaches $20 to $30 on a static balance, combined with thousands of dollars in deferred charges, reducing the actual principal balance becomes mathematically impossible for low and middle income earners. This dynamic directly mirrors the historic installment credit boom of the late 1920s, where households financed furniture, radios, and daily goods under a superficial illusion of permanent prosperity. When underlying consumer income weakened, loan defaults cascaded instantly through the banking architecture. Today, that exact same structural vulnerability has been digitized and scaled across the entire economy. Unlike the credit booms of the past, modern digital lending platforms operate entirely outside the traditional credit bureau network, allowing consumers to carry multiple overlapping installment loans across separate apps without any centralized visibility. The broader economy has become profoundly fragile. Any minor external shock, a sudden job freeze, an unexpected medical event, or an abrupt rent increase instantly converts these invisible microdebts into a wave of active delinquency. This credit dependency is being met by an aggressive, escalating property and municipal tax burden as major urban centers experience population outmigration, face massive historic pension deficits, absorb escalating operational overhead, and witness the total collapse of their commercial real estate tax bases. They are turning directly to the only remaining revenue source, the ordinary resident. This fiscal desperation has unleashed a nationwide tax shockwave that quietly strips working families of what little financial stability they have left. Property taxes function as the most aggressive pressure point in this extraction. In multiple counties across the interior and the coasts, property tax invoices that historically sat at $5,000 to $7,000 have surged toward $11,000 to $15,000 within less than 2 assessment cycles. These massive tax surges are completely unlinked to wage growth or actual property maintenance. They are pure fiscal extractions necessary to cover structural municipal budget deficits. Apartment renters absorb these tax hikes indirectly through automated monthly rent increases, while traditional homeowners face an immediate liquidity crisis. Simultaneously, municipal sales taxes and localized service fees add an inescapable layer of pressure. In numerous cities, combined sales tax rates have broken past the 10% threshold, silently raising the cost of every single physical transaction. Municipal governments are aggressively deploying new microcharges on essential water infrastructure, waste disposal, baseline grid usage, and parking access. A single monthly utility bill can include between 6 and 12 distinct administrative surcharges, each representing a budgetary extraction disguised as environmental compliance or infrastructure modernization. Transportation taxation is expanding rapidly through the implementation of dynamic toll lanes and usage-based vehicle billing. Highways that were originally constructed using public taxpayer funds are being systematically sold back to the workforce through express access pricing models, turning basic public infrastructure into a corporate recurring revenue stream. Commuting to an office now carries intense financial penalties that are entirely separate from raw fuel prices. A standard daily commute can easily demand $10 to $20 in automated toll fees alone, transforming the act of employment into a heavily taxed activity. This cumulative tax compression deepens municipal deficits over time by driving high-value residents out of the region, forcing further tax hikes on the shrinking population left behind. This extraction shockwave is most visible within America's major urban centers, where affordability has fractured so severely that even long-term, multi-generational residents can no longer physically afford to participate in the local economy. These core urban regions serve as the frontline demonstration of a system that is breaking down in real time. Miami. Once aggressively marketed as a cosmopolitan coastal paradise, Miami has been transformed into a primary node of extreme overcrowding and structural unaffordability. Basic residential rents that sat at $1,800 a few years ago have surged toward $3,500 to $4,500 for non-luxury units, forcing stable, full-time workers into improvised backyard efficiencies, converted storage units, or shared bedrooms. With local windstorm insurance premiums and municipal fees rising in lockstep with rent, the crisis has transitioned from an inconvenience into a critical issue of daily survival. Chicago. The city's intense property tax explosion has executed a devastating financial toll on both working-class homeowners and local renters. Assessments jumping from $6,000 to $13,000 on modest residential structures have completely destabilized entire working-class neighborhoods. For the tenant population, these property tax hikes translate directly into immediate monthly rent increases of $300 to $600, advancing at a speed that completely outruns localized wage growth and forcing long-term residents out of their communities. Santa Monica. This region exposes the absolute extreme of top-end market distortion. Within standard residential complexes, studio apartments are tagged at $4,500, one bedrooms clear $6,000, and standard family units reach an astonishing $12,000 per month. These are not luxury estates. They are ordinary residential units priced at levels that are completely severed from any rational standard of local income distribution, signaling a total decoupling of cost versus utility. New York. The metropolitan core has entered an era where even dual-income professional households are structurally barred from remaining within city limits. Aggressive rental bidding wars, mandatory broker move-in fees crossing $5,000, and heavy regulatory costs embedded into every basic service create an entry threshold that completely eliminates the middle-class workforce. The inevitable result is a mass outbound migration of families and an intensely polarized economic landscape where only extreme inherited wealth or extreme lifestyle sacrifice permits physical residency. The collapse of urban affordability has triggered a far more corrosive, non-measurable fallout: the total unraveling of the middle class at an emotional, psychological, and behavioral level. Persistent economic pressure has advanced past the point of affecting consumer lifestyles. It is actively reshaping human identity and eroding the long-term aspirations of the population. Chronic burnout has been transformed into the dominant psychological condition of the modern workforce. Individuals dedicating 40 to 60 hours a week to intense labor report, having less than $200 of disposable capital left over after matching their non-negotiable monthly invoices. The population is functioning in a state of permanent financial survival stress, completely locked out from participating in cultural life, spontaneous social gatherings, or long-term personal development. Core human hobbies that historically defined individual purpose and community texture, including writing, music, art, independent travel, and physical fitness, are steadily disappearing because individuals lack both the residual time and the cognitive energy required to execute them. Daily human routines have been reduced to an unyielding cycle of commuting, working, paying bills, and recovering just enough to repeat the sequence the following morning. Even more alarming is the total erosion of forward-looking aspiration. The traditional milestones of a successful life, including independent homeownership, absolute financial autonomy, marriage, family planning, and a predictable retirement, have been rendered completely structurally inaccessible to a massive segment of the young adult population. Working adults in their late 20s and early 40s are realizing that they cannot afford an independent apartment without parental assistance or multiple roommates, because every major cost category has permanently decoupled from the wage structure. Dreams that were once considered the standard reward for basic social responsibility now feel like abstract relics of a bygone economic era. This psychological collapse feeds directly into profound social detachment. Individuals systematically withdraw from active community groups because participation carries a financial cost they cannot spare. Concurrently, digital social media algorithms highlight an endless stream of hyperabundance, luxury international travel, and curated elite lifestyles, creating a permanent comparison loop that intensifies a sense of personal failure, even though the source of the distress is entirely systemic. The middle class is not disappearing gracefully. It is dissolving from the interior out. The psychological unraveling of the population sets the stage for a major structural rupture. The warning signals are no longer abstract projections. They are deeply embedded within every single national macroeconomic metric. The United States enters this environment carrying an unprecedented $38 trillion federal debt load, expanding at a velocity that completely outpaces nominal GDP growth, real tax revenue generation, and physical productivity. The interest payments required to simply maintain this sovereign debt are approaching levels historically reserved for full-scale wartime emergencies, consuming the vital fiscal capacity that previously funded social safety nets, regional infrastructure repair, and emergency domestic support. At the exact same historical moment, the labor market is tightening in ways that expose its core fragility. The automated displacement driven by artificial intelligence is projected to accelerate rapidly, potentially eliminating hundreds of thousands of corporate more administrative and cognitive roles, while offering zero equivalent physical employment replacements. Companies confronting high borrowing costs and declining consumer velocity are pulling back on headcount, contracting worker hours, and freezing entry-level hiring. This labor contraction strikes precisely at the chronological moment when domestic households have completely depleted their pandemic-era savings buffers and entirely exhausted their access to traditional consumer credit lines. Simultaneously, the residential housing market faces renewed structural instability as millions of historic homeowners encounter soaring property insurance premiums and massive property tax reassessments. More critically, a massive wave of short-term mortgages written at historic 2% to 3% rates is scheduled to reset toward the modern 6% to 7% environment, instantly pushing monthly housing payments completely past the threshold of affordability for millions of families. Urban municipalities operating with severely degraded tax bases, massive legacy pension obligations, and escalating public service demands are confronting intense budget shortfalls that limit their structural ability to provide baseline social safety nets. Every major indicator points directly to a total convergence of forces, accelerating sovereign debt, systemic white-collar job destruction, structural housing cost resets, and a total hollowing out of institutional capacity are forming a synchronized national pressure point. When all four of these foundational pillars fail simultaneously, the economic architecture does not simply bend, it permanently breaks.